Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannon. Today, I'm going to do a review of Chapter 6 of my newest book, God and Our Superdeterministic Universe, the number one argument for the existence of God. This book can be found on Amazon Kindle. So, Chapter 6 is entitled Everything is Predetermined. Um, the universe is a block reality. That means it consists of timeless, abutting hyperplanes of space-time in a manifold. Because Dr. Hansen proved that temporal causation or continuous causation in physics is not a real thing, then the universe is this block reality without temporal causation, which means things do not actually change in time. And in order for that to be true, that means the future is predetermined, it's unchangeable. There is no mechanism by which one can change the future because temporal causation is not real. Consequently, the future has to be predetermined and unchangeable. Um, so, because the future is predetermined and unchangeable, you are not the master of your own fate or destiny. You cannot change what is going to happen to you in the future. It is predetermined and it is impossible for you to change. This means, for example, the future date of your death is predetermined and you can't change it. The means by which you will die is predetermined and you cannot change it. What will be, will be. Of course, you don't generally know what will be because you can't change it. If you could know what the future would hold, it seems that you could take action to prevent that future from occurring. But because there's no temporal causation, there's no mechanism by which you can change the future because it's predetermined, you can't generally know the future. So, um, what can you do? Well, because the universe is generally strictly deterministic, that means that the events of the present are generally strictly determined by the events of the past. And the events of the future are also generally strictly determined by the events of the present. What happens in the present is a leading indicator of what is uh, predetermined to occur in the future. So you can always use the present leading indicators or events in your life to predict what the future outcome is strictly determined to be. So when you talk about superdeterminism, you're generally talking about leading indicators of what is likely to happen. But you can't know for sure what is going to happen, with the exception of perhaps some sort of prophecy, divine prophecy. But even in that case, the prophecy about the future wouldn't allow the future to change. Um, now, understanding that the future is predetermined and can't be changed does have some impacts on your mental state. For instance, one's predetermined future will always arrive. So there is no need to worry about destroying one's future. You can't. It is what it is, and you can't change it. You can't destroy it. Um, However, because the universe is super deterministic, it does make sense to conduct oneself in a manner that would be a leading indicator of what one's desired future is. So it does make sense to try to create the future you want, because in a predetermined universe, if that future is predetermined, then there's a good chance that you're predetermined to act in a way that would lead to that predetermined future. Superdeterminism also gives some comfort to those who suffer loss, because such a loss was completely unavoidable. So, because the future is predetermined, you cannot avoid a predetermined loss, no matter what you do. There's also absolutely no point in regretting anything, because you couldn't have changed it. When you regret something, you think about something that happened in the past, and you wish that you could have done something different in order to change the outcome. But you couldn't have done anything different because you were predetermined to do what you did. So there's no point in regretting anything. There really isn't. It's a waste of energy and emotion. Uh, you know, Also, if people mistreat you or abuse you, there's also very little point in getting angry or vengeful against them, because in a predetermined universe, they were predetermined to mistreat you and abuse you. They had no choice but to do that, because that's what the universe had them predetermined to do. So, why waste all this negative energy on something that could not have been any different, even if it personally harms you? That's the way it was going to be, whether you like it or not. No point in getting upset about it. Um, if there are people who mistreat you or abuse you, just understand that this is a leading indicator that those people are headed to hell, because they're evil people. Uh, but it's not as if they could have behaved differently. They couldn't have. Now, this raises an interesting point. In a predetermined universe, obviously, God's decision on whether you go to heaven or hell is not a wait and see decision. God doesn't wait to see what you do on earth to decide whether you should go to heaven or hell. God already knows everything that you're going to do, because the universe is predetermined. So, God's decision on whether you go to heaven or hell, encompasses more than just what happens on earth. Now, God is omniscient, which means God knows everything that can be known. So that means God also knows all your freely willed decisions in all circumstances, in all possible universes. And God doesn't need to create any of those universes in order to have that knowledge, because God knows everything. Um, so when God creates a predetermined universe with your freely willed decisions being exhibited in that universe, then it has to be based on God's omniscient knowledge of what you would freely choose to do. But nevertheless, it's still a predetermined outcome. So God must have this knowledge of all your freely willed decisions. And it's reasonable to believe that God would use his omniscient knowledge of your whole being in all circumstances, in all possible universes, to judge you in deciding whether you go to heaven or hell. Now, what you do on earth obviously is a special situation because God actually created the earth and you actually exhibit behavior in that predetermined universe. So there's reason to believe that uh, what you do on earth is a leading indicator of whether you're going to hell or heaven after death. But it's also your guarantee that you will exist in an afterlife. It's your ticket to heaven, really. The fact that you actually are in this predetermined universe. Because of Jesus Christ, you were given the promise of an afterlife. So, uh, God actually creating you in a predetermined universe, even though God knows exactly what you're going to do, is your guarantee that you will exist in an afterlife, as opposed to all those hypothetical people God also knows about, but God has not actually created into physical reality. So, this idea that God uses his omniscient knowledge, you could call it omnipresence if you want. So, this idea that God knows everything that you would ever do, you freely choose to do in all circumstances and in all universes without the need to create any of those universes, or omnipresence. This idea that God uses his omnipresence in deciding your fate in the afterlife based on your whole person and his knowledge of everything you would do under all circumstances helps solve some really difficult questions, like how does God decide whether somebody who has no knowledge of God or Jesus Christ goes to heaven or hell? Like the caveman, right? Some human being who lived in a cave 10,000 years ago, way before Jesus ever lived, never heard of God. How does God decide whether the caveman goes to heaven or hell? Well, omnipresence gives you an answer to that question. God knows how the caveman would have behaved if he had known of Jesus, because God has omnipresence of the caveman's freely will decisions in all possible circumstances, in all possible universes, including where the caveman knows about Jesus Christ. Or, for example, what about the aborted baby? So here you have a human being whose life was cut short before they were even born. How does God decide whether an aborted baby should go to heaven or hell? The baby never did anything on earth to justify either eternal damnation or eternal salvation. Well, omnipresence answers that question. God knows what this person would do in all circumstances, in all possible universes, including universes in which that person was not aborted and lived a full life. So omnipresence gives God a basis to decide the question of eternal salvation and damnation for the caveman and the aborted baby. So this is a really good idea an explanation for some impossible questions, which is a result of superdeterminism. Superdeterminism also solves something called the prayer paradox. And the prayer paradox basically asks the question, well, how can an omnipotent God uh, not be able to grant your prayers? But in a circumstance, it's possible that it wouldn't be logically possible for God to grant your prayer. So, for example, a young girl was late for elementary school and was praying for the school bus to come around the corner at that moment so that she could make it to school on time. But then she realized that in order for this to happen, God would have had to have made the change to when the school bus initially departed before she even started praying, which is clearly impossible. So, how is it that God can answer the prayer of this elementary school girl, even though it seems too late to do anything about the bus arriving on time? And the answer to the prayer paradox is superdeterminism. The universe is predetermined, which means that both the elementary school girl's prayer and God's response to that prayer are predetermined, which means God could predetermine uh, traffic to hit to slow the school bus down before this girl even prayed because her prayer was predetermined. God already knew it was coming. So he predetermined his response to occur before the prayer. But that can happen because the whole sequence of events was predetermined. So God already knew she was going to pray. So he put a response in before her prayer in order to answer her prayer so that the school bus would get slowed down and arrive on time right after her prayer. All right. One might wonder what knowledge that the universe is superdeterministic or predetermined without temporal causation, how that would affect their life. What change would it make to your life? And there's really two big areas where this knowledge of superdeterminism would change your life. The first is um, it gives you reason to believe that God is real, and so is Jesus and his church. Um, that religious understanding, especially if one adopts the practices of Christianity, can have a vast impact on one's life for the better. The second area is the understanding that everything is predetermined and you can't change anything should really put one's mindset in a much more relaxed and peaceful mode of living. Uh, because you know you can't change anything. Regardless of what you do, the future will be what it will be. Um, so those are two huge impacts that superdeterminism can have on one's life. And they're both very positive impacts. So there is every reason to learn about superdeterminism, learn about Dr. Hanson's proof in order to get God in your life, and in order to be more relaxed and peaceful. Um, okay, so I hope you learned something. The next chapter that I'm going to do a video on is chapter 7, which is entitled Life is Special. And take care.